Hello everyone, my name is Salma Avdic, and on behalf of the American Marketing Association, I'd like to welcome you all to today's webcast sponsored by Cardinal Path. As part of our continuing efforts to be the most relevant force and voice shaping marketing around the world, the AMA offers a variety of resources, trainings, and tools to enhance lifelong learning and provide valuable information and connections. Please feel free to visit ama.org for more information. Now, before we get started, I just want to go through some housekeeping items. And the webcast is being recorded and will be made available to you soon. If you have any technical or content-related questions today, please feel free to ask them at any time. You can use the chat box feature, which is located on the left hand of your screen. And last but not least, we invite you to continue this conversation on Twitter by adding or searching for #digitalmarketingtools. So I am very happy to introduce our speakers for today. We have Alex Langsher, who's the Vice President, Co-founder, and Senior Partner at Cardinal Path. Alex has helped build one of the largest digital marketing analytics consulting firms in North America and leads Cardinal Path's global digital intelligence and digital marketing training initiatives across 50+ countries. Alex also teaches digital marketing optimization for the University of British Columbia, and he is on the board of advisors for McMaster University's analytics program. We also have Corey Coburg with us. He is also Vice President, Co-founder, and Senior Partner at Cardinal Path. And Corey leads the advertising, social, user experience, development, and search optimization practices at Cardinal Path. He has also worked as an advisor with organizations such as Google, Intel, Chevron, NBC, Papa John's, National Geographic, Time Warner, and many more. He is also a well-known industry speaker and author. And we also have Eric Hitchman, who is a staff consultant in digital marketing. And Eric is a self-processed data geek who uses his expertise in performance media, e-commerce, digital advertising, and media buying to really bolster the results for Fortune 500 companies across CPG, high-tech, telecoms, insurance, retail, and automotive industries. And so with that, I am very happy to turn over this presentation to Corey to get us started.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. So many of you are here because you want to learn more about enacting an omni-channel approach. And over the next hour, we're going to lay out a path that's been successfully used by Cardinal Path clients for really the three most important components. First, we're going to talk about the overall strategy. Then Alex is going to follow up with the analytics and measurement framework. And finally, Eric is going to discuss how to activate this via programmatic media. So as consumers, you'd experience brands that do a very good job of interacting with you via a single channel. For instance, they'll have an in-store expert and they truly understand how their products work. So you think about your local butcher. They're a good example of a single channel operation. They don't do email, they don't really advertise. In the next stage, you've got some brands that interact with consumers across multiple channels, but they're going to manage those channels independently. Everybody's had that moment where you're in store with a coupon, you go in there and you get them via email, but the sales associate there, they have no idea what this promotion is. Or even worse, the item hasn't even arrived in the store yet. They don't offer to help you order it online. And really, this entire interaction is fairly disappointing from a consumer point of view. Now, we've got brands that are able to execute with a cross-channel perspective, and they're able to provide that consistent messaging and those offers to customers, but they're typically only going to be at certain points in the customer journey. And usually we see this focus is on orchestrating campaigns versus the always-on. When we think about omni-channel, we're going to think about understanding and optimizing for the entire customer journey across all of the channels. brands really need to think about how they can begin to orchestrate these consistent experiences across all of their channels, no matter where you start or no matter how you're interacting. You're going to get that same offer regardless of the channel, regardless of the touch point. This is the vision of how Cardinal Path views the true omnichannel marketing. So we often organize our companies and our agencies by channel. You have some folks that handle paid search, others handle email or social. But customers don't define their relationship with our brand by channels. They expect brands to understand and react to their needs, and they will reward those that do. So when we think about enabling this, the key is to first understand as much as we can about who they are, and we have data about how they've interacted with our brand, our website, our social properties, emails, really all of our channels. The key is tying that all together. Now, relevancy is critical, as is consistency of message across those channels. Customers will engage when the conversation is about what they are interested in, and your timing is critical to seize that moment for when this topic is relevant to them. Now, customers want brands to take into account their past behaviors. That's something that we're seeing here. Now, this includes the research they've done, the shopping experience, post-purchase. A few examples of this. So mobile research and mobile shopping is rapidly increasing. In-store shopping isn't going away, though. And in some cases, we're actually seeing a revival in in-store. Even Amazon is rumored to be opening stores. So the question is, how can digital channels enhance that in-store experience? Now, consumers expect flexibility when they interact with brands. They want to research online and perhaps purchase in-store. Maybe they want to purchase online and just pick up in-store. They want to purchase in-store and have the item shipped to them to the same day right to their home so they don't have to leave. Now, the thing is, once consumers experience omnichannel done right, they expect that same level of service with every brand they interact with. The bar is raising. So it's not enough to just look at what your direct competitors are doing. Customers are comparing you to all the different brands that they engage with. Now, brick-and-mortar retailers can differentiate around this consumer desire for flexibility and leverage that in-store purchase and interactions. I think of one case where we actually had a footwear client, and we had an email that was sent to a male customer. The email came in, and the subject line was about exactly the kinds of shoes that they needed. They're excited to open it. And unfortunately, this one only contained examples of products being featured in this email of women's shoes. And so the customer was actually annoyed enough to complain about the email that came back. And so the person handling this, who was someone I knew, said he went and asked the email team, and said, well, why would we send this email to someone we knew was a male customer and offer them only women's shoes? And their answer was kind of a shrug to say, well, because those were the products that convert the best on our site. Of course, his answer back was, okay, but do they convert the best when you send them to a male customer? And again, they just shrug and say, well, we don't target that way. And so we can see that this is something where we have a lot of room to improve. We need to stop thinking of the overall universe of what products convert the best for everyone, or try to find that one-size-fits-all, and start thinking about individual customers, or at least individual segments of customers, and how that they want to interact and how we want to market specifically to them. Now, we think about a great example here of where omnichannel experience is moving is Starbucks. And there's three important things I want to call out here. First is they've got a mobile-first experience. This is something that fits with their business and the way that their customers want to interact. People are on the move. This is something where you're in transit, and you're going to be picking up in store. So being that mobile experience is important. You now have the ability to order in-app and pick up in the store, so you get that experience. And they also can deliver consistent cross-channel promotions through email, in-app messages. And they support that fulfillment of these promotions both in-store or via the app. So you really are blurring those differences between the channels. All the customers know is that they are interacting with Starbucks. It's easy, and most importantly, it meets the customers on their term, on their preferred channel. Now, a few key points on what makes this successful. First is that it was iterative. They didn't start with in-app ordering. This is simply payment. And so as they've had the ability to pull in their point-of-sale systems, as they've had the ability to get the rest of their kind of puzzle pieces in place, they've enhanced the ability of this. But they didn't wait until it was perfect in order to launch it. The second piece of this is that it was linked to their loyalty program. So they were leveraging all of their existing infrastructure and assets. If you have existing infrastructure or things that you can take advantage of, by all means you should do that. And it works around the system and their process limitations. They still need to provide a code to the cashier for some offers because the point-of-sale systems weren't in there. That's fine. It's not perfect, but again, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. deal with what you can and go iteratively. So studies are showing that these marketers want to get to omnichannel, and they want to do it more quickly than they have been doing. And the issue here is that while they see the vision, organizations are struggling to get there. They're clearly seeing consumers are going to expect this seamless experience. In fact, there's a survey by SAP and says that 86% of marketers agree that the omnichannel benefits are outweighing the challenges. So there's no doubt there's some challenges, but the benefits are clear. That said, even though omnichannel is the goal and everyone knows it, only 16% of businesses are saying that they are meeting the needs for the consumer experience via multi-channel. So we have a ways to go to really kind of realize this. The question is, why is this so challenging? And I'd say the first thing is that customer activity is not linear. Marketing funnels, if there really ever was one, used to be the traditional representation of this interaction through a brand. You'd start with awareness, maybe move into preference, ultimately make a purchase, and then you've got a low customer. Now, marketers understand that we really don't control the customer's journey, particularly in this age of multi-channel, multi-device. Customers are going to go to the channel they want, and they're going to go when they want. The second thing is that customers use multiple devices, and what's really interesting is that they also use them at the same time. So a third of screen time is simultaneous use of TV and a digital device. You're sitting on the couch, you're watching something, and you've got the phone in hand or the tablet in hand, and you're interacting with both of those at the same time. You also see this starting on one, finishing on another. 40% of people who start an activity on one screen are going to finish it on another device. And this is not something that's isolated. 60% of adults are using at least 2 screens a day. Now, the last piece here is that to make all of this work, the technology is complex. And the one I want to stress is organizational realities come into play. We talked a little bit about how we are set up for a multi-channel scenario where different folks are managing different channels. We just don't tend to have that coordinated approach. So it's important to note that while necessary, this is not just about the technology. It really is about making sure you have an organization that is aligned and has the capabilities required to deliver this omnichannel experience. And for many folks, that's going to be requiring really rethinking the way that you are there. Organizations are often going to use this technology as a crutch, and it's going to be essentially a scapegoat for why they're not delivering the right customer experience, when many times it's because we haven't thought about how the organization needs to be structured.
And Corey, can I add something there to this? Is that in some cases organizations are actually struggling through external forces, right, which with respect to what rights they have to use certain types of data, what the quality of that data may be, whether that can be merged or they have the ability to actually merge that data. So there are things which we understand are really tough challenges. I mean, I like to say these are 21st century challenges that companies are facing right now in trying to manage this, but it's absolutely something they need to steer into.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. So we can really boil this down to 4 key steps that need to take place. Now, the first is to collect the data. So we got first-party data that's owned by your organization. So this might be your loyalty, your CRM, your point of sale, customer service. And then you've also got first-party digital behavior, right? So this is website behavior, e-commerce actions, mobile app usage, things that are data that's coming in through your channels but are coming in through digital means. We've also got second-party data. So if you're working with a trusted partner and you might be sharing each other's first-party data, that's the second party. And then the third party, most marketers are going to be familiar with this. It's going to be the demographic interests, things that are going to come in about these that's collected on other things that are not owned by you. And the second step through this is to resolve identity. So this identity resolution piece is critical to unify all this data. You've got all these different data points coming in. How are you going to unify them and accurately assign each of these pieces to a customer profile so we can start to get this customer-centric view and really understand who they are and all the different interactions and channels that belong to one person. Various methods to do this. The approach needs to be tailored to your organization and what your stack looks like, and particularly if you can take advantage of loyalty programs or infrastructure that's already in place. Third step here is to create the audiences. So once the identities are determined in step 2, then we can start to group these similar profiles and create this set of audience segments. These audiences are going to help us identify, classify these customers into groups in ways that are easy for marketers to understand and to activate. And so the primary way we're going to reach new people who are likely to be interested in your product or service because they're going to be similar to your best customers. We're going to find who our best customers are and then do that lookalike modeling from there. And the fourth one here is that we want to activate this across our different channels. This is going to be, the final and probably the most important step is how do we actually do something with this? How can we make this actionable? So we can make these audiences available across all of our channels in different respects. We want to enable that consistent omnichannel experience. So you're going to hear more about one way to activate your data in just a minute here. Eric's going to tell us about how we can do this through programmatic media buying. But first, Alex is going to tell us a little bit more about the measurement piece of this. And so one of the ways we want to think about this from a measurement point of view is that the strategy we've talked about so far has two kind of components. We're going to have first is how we're going to measure this and what the analytics are going to be that drive this, and then we're going to turn that over to the activation piece. And I want to stress that this is an ongoing process. This is not a one-time project, and as such there's going to be a cycle that works well, and we tend to use this in order to manage it and optimize it. To do that, of course, we need analytics. The first piece here is we're going to define the business objectives and then the KPIs that are going to feed in that tell us how we're doing on each of those objectives. To do that, we need to create and update this measurement framework. We're going to create and update the reporting that goes into that so we can visualize what's happening with this. We're going to then perform and activate the analysis that's going to tell us the insights and how to optimize this and what pieces we need to tweak. And then we're going to optimize the activation piece based on the analysis we just performed and then do it all over again. So to tell us about this analytics measurement process, I will turn it over to Alex Langsher.
Well, thank you very much, Corey. And this is an area that I'm actually really, I'm really focused on a lot with our clients, and it's this ability for them to kind of make sense of all the data. And one of the things that we find is that people get the idea that I've got these digital assets, and I've got people that are engaging with us across our digital assets. But the idea of how do I really approach the analysis process is there's kind of no standard way of doing this. And this is kind of the approach that we recommend, and that is you start first with a measurement framework. And what do we mean by a measurement framework? It's this kind of, figure for physics, this grand unifying theory. It's a grand unifying theory around how you put together KPIs, the metrics that support those KPIs, the goals that those ladder up to, the audiences, and the customer journey. So what it does is a measurement framework is a structure for you. It's a means for you to kind of understand how people are engaging with you across your digital assets. It provides a means for you to put the picture and the story around those, because your measurement framework is designed to identify your audiences against their trajectory and against what they're doing along that trajectory. So it really creates a very clear linkage between what the business objectives are as well as what those outcomes that you're trying to measure against those. So how do we do that? Right? What's the way that we start? When people say, hey, look, we'd like to put together a measurement framework, where do we start? Well, very much the first thing you want to do is you want to go back to your goals, right? You want to sit down and brainstorm with a group and think really broadly. Don't be constrained by data. Don't be constrained by anything other than what is the business trying to do? What are we building our digital ecosystem to enable? What are the assets that we're creating against those goals that we have? And let's define them. So you can say, oh, we absolutely would love to know who the visitor is, or we'd love to drive sales, or whatever. We want to create a higher login rate to our sites across different devices so that we can do some mapping across devices of individual people. Whatever those things might be, you want to really get them out on paper and then and put them out in a very broad sense. So first off, what does a business need? What are the goals that we're trying to get? Next up, those goals don't just exist in a vacuum. Those goals, if you start to look at them, you should be able to slot those goals some way, somehow, against some aspect of a customer journey. So as Corey said, the customer journey is not linear, right? So we know it's not step 1, step 2, step 3. That's not the case. But it's a good, useful mental model to say we know at some point in time people, after they become aware of us, they're going to be moving into that consideration phase. Now, how that might happen and the steps to make that happen may be different, but there's a general step that we can follow people along. So let's take those goals and let's try and align each one of those goals into that customer journey. Now, for our sake here and for this this webinar, we're using a very classic awareness, consideration, purchase, loyalty, and advocacy as a customer journey. But that might be completely irrelevant to your business. So it's really important for you, not only after you've done your goals, but to understand what your customer journey might be, and then to use that as the basic buckets that you're going to slot your various goals into. Just the next thing we do. But the reality is that your customer journey is going to change. So each, to the next slide. So your customer journey is going to have different audiences are going to be doing different things at each stage in the customer journey. You know that you have different audiences. And so what we try to do is to say, all right, let's identify what those are. They might not be 100%, but they are close enough to start. You need a place to start. So in this case, what we're looking at is saying, well, we might have some buyers, might have some people that are actually loyal customers. Somebody who's a loyal customer is going to behave differently than somebody who is new to the brand. So after we've done that, we can come up with different customer segments. Like you might have customer segments that might be based on device type. You can have customer segments based on location. You can have customer segments based on whatever you dream of. I mean, the idea is that you want to think through and align those to your different steps in the customer journey. And each one of those is going to have a different KPI. So I'm going to ask if somebody can advance the slide for me. Once you've got the customer lifecycle and the audiences lined up, we know that different people at different stages in that customer journey are going to be doing different things. So if we take, for example, a buyer at the consideration phase is going to be doing things which are very different from somebody at a different stage. And so you can say, all right, well, we expect that somebody who's a buyer will look at a certain number of pages. They may have looked at the same product. They may have come from a specific type of device. They may not have purchased anything because they're still at the consideration phase. They haven't logged in. They haven't created an account. They have very different behaviors at that particular point in the customer cycle than at a different point in the customer cycle. So those KPIs and those business goals will be very different. If you consider somebody who's further down, somebody who's a repeat customer and who's a loyal repeat customer, well, I would expect that person to have very different KPIs at that particular point. So that intersection of the customer life cycle and the audience changes. Those KPIs change by where they are. And you can build that out across every one of those audience sets for each step in that customer life cycle. Now, what we have is an example of this exact customer life cycle with different KPIs and goals for each stage. So you can see that basic metrics may include something like, for example, campaign conversion for convert. This is one specific type of audience doing something that's very different than somebody who would be at the attract stage for that same audience, right? So at the attract, I'm trying to find people by their age or gender or profession, whereas when I'm at the retain and deepen, I am going to be doing some campaign retargeting, and I expect those people to come back. So the audience and the life cycle stage have to align. Now, if we go to the next slide, the challenge for us becomes, and this is where this connects up with what Corey was talking about, the challenge for us becomes, where do we go and get that data? Right? So if we have that line of sight across our data sets, as Corey indicated, we can now say, all right, I know that for this particular KPI, I will need to pull that from, for example, my CRM. Or this particular KPI might be coming from my data, my web analytics. This KPI might be coming from something which is a combination of the two. So understanding all the various data sets within your data stack are critical to informing and enabling the measurement framework to come to life. Which then brings us back to the optimization circle of life, as Corey likes to say. So we've defined our KPIs, we've built the measurement framework, and now we're going to create the reports and visualizations that support our analysis. We want to activate that data, and lastly comes optimization. So I'm going to turn this over to Eric Hitchman to tell us a little bit about that.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Appreciate that. So to get started, I'm sure that a lot of the attendees have had a varying degree of exposure using pay-per-click search campaigns across Bing, Google, Yahoo. This really is a type of what might be called self-service programmatic ad buy. So as a side note here, self-service is really just a type of programmatic ad buy, and it in effect means that each of these platforms has provided advertisers with a tool where we can place a bid against the impression inventory that's available through their properties. So through the use of these tools, they offer a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility with targeting, and it really gives us the opportunity to make quick changes to budgets, bids, audiences, creatives, ad schedules, list goes on. To top it off here, because they're self-service and a majority of the buying process for these platforms have been automated, there's no real minimum purchase or no real minimum ad buy required. And this is kind of an important point here. I mean, can you imagine, making an ad buy like this using a non-programmatic method? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. I can picture the email now. It would be pages and pages of targeting specifics. It's absolute nightmare. So the question I just kind of want to follow up here is, what is programmatic? So simply put, programmatic ad buying refers to the use of technology to purchase and even in some cases actually optimize digital media. So this is opposed to a lot of traditional processes, things that might involve a lot of manual work, back and forth communication, negotiations, contracts, even a few phone calls. So, what does this lead us to? Using technology to purchase and optimize media? Well, it's access. It's access to two things, the inventory and the ability to actually request a purchase, but also some of the data points that advertisers need to make an informed purchase, to target the right audiences, and in some cases to optimize their media buy. On the second front, it's efficiency of the buying process. The speed advertisers can make adjustments to their target audiences, their creatives, in some cases their ceiling price or even their max bid for a given impression in a real-time bidding environment. So the interesting thing here is scale. I mean, scale is certainly a benefit of programmatic in some sense, but realistically, this is an output. This is an output of both efficiency and access. When you have an efficient way to buy ads, an efficient way to target, and you have access to the data you need to optimize, that's going to lead very, very, very specifically to scale. So the next question I run into a lot is, how does this differ from, programmatic marketing? And I think that, I think you could say that programmatic buying is really a subsection of programmatic marketing. So the focus with programmatic marketing really is activation. You're still using a real-time system, but you're taking it kind of a step further, and you're incorporating a lot of very specific criteria based on some of the stuff that based on some of the stuff that Corey was talking about earlier in terms of audience creation. You're applying that specific criteria to automate the purchase with the purpose of delivering relevant content experiences to consumers both cross-channel and cross-device. So I want to try and tie it a little bit back to kind of a measurement framework and omni-channel strategy. So, having a measurement framework means you have a good understanding of what KPIs and outcomes measure success throughout the customer lifecycle, and you have some sort of an associated value for those successes. Point number two, having an omni-channel strategy means, at least in part, that you're getting closer to knowing what your customer touchpoints are and how each of them affect the customer journey. Most importantly, it's being able to meaningfully communicate with your customers at each of these intersections. When we talk about programmatic marketing, you're using technology to help deliver the correct content at the right time, to the right device, to the right audience. And not only that, but you're giving yourself the ability to measure the impact of those touch points in a way that helps to inform a future media buy. So I think that's really the big takeaway message here. Programmatic marketing isn't a channel or a specific media buy that you're going to ask your agency or your marketing department for. Programmatic marketing is taking advantage of an automated buying process which allows for efficient targeting of media to reach your potential customers based on where they are in the customer lifecycle. So next, really just wanted to kind of cover some of the benefits of programmatic. I think that nobody on the call today would disagree that being able to efficiently hone in on the right audience with the appropriate message, it's going to lead to cost savings. This can be summed up as simply as knowing that fewer impressions are being purchased and potentially wasted against audiences that just don't fit the message or fit the behavior that we're looking for. On the efficiency side of things, when you think about it, being able to report mid-campaign or mid-flight that a particular message just isn't being well received by an audience, this is really, really powerful stuff. These types of things can really help inform decisions on two fronts. On the tactical side, for efforts like reallocation of budgets between campaigns, or optimizing your bidding to reach a KPI goal, or even on the strategic front related to recrafting the message, rethinking what you're trying to actually accomplish by targeting a particular audience. So this is really efficiency. And what it leads to? It leads to a lot of quick pivoting. I come from a search background, and we've always had a lot of control in the way that we could buy media. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about empowerment. It allows advertisers and brands to take action on performance rather than just reporting on it. It really can shift reporting conversations to your executives, to your clients, from a "this is what happened" to a "this is what's next" type mentality. So programmatic really does, it offers a ton of ways for advertisers to reach audiences in a variety of places where, in all honesty, they simply may not be able to reach them otherwise. But it's important to note here that the opportunity in programmatic isn't about reaching necessarily a larger audience in a new place. It's about reaching a more valuable audience with a more consistent and meaningful message. If I could leave kind of one message behind here, it really is, put your data to work. We've all spent a ton of time and oftentimes a lot of money, trying to collect and analyze our data better. Web analytics can be, one of the most valuable assets that a marketing team has at its fingertips. At the very least, if you're not putting this data to work in some way, you're going to be missing out on some opportunity. You just really are. It's right at your fingertips. So you need to be able to activate it quickly, even if you're not reaching a kind of an omni-channel place in your strategy. So the last thing I kind of wanted to talk about here was, the question that everybody is consistently asking, is programmatic the future of ad buying? So, programmatic is certainly a big part of the future of digital ad buying. Nobody will argue that. This study here from eMarketer, it shows 72% of digital media spend will be programmatic in some way by 2017. That's a huge number. It's a very big number. So the question here is no longer, is it the future? The question really, when we talk about this is, are you taking advantage of all the opportunities that programmatic ad buying has to offer? Consistently here, I have to be honest with you, consistently, the answer is no. A lot of advertisers are making programmatic ad buying work for them, but not all of them are taking the next steps toward the true programmatic marketing mentality. And again, this is knowing your customer, knowing how your brand's touch points can impact customer behavior, and also just knowing how to effectively reach the audience with a meaningful message and a relevant message.
Can I jump in here? I want to add something. So, going back to the measurement framework, right? I talked about audiences, right? The value in programmatic is not that it is, just a mushy audience. The value is that you're doing some very sophisticated reaching of very specific target audiences, right? So this is why having that measurement framework and having those audiences so well defined is so critical, because it enables you to understand the value of those audiences if they behave in ways that align to what your expectations are. And then you can use that, of course, when you're creating those audience segments, as Corey was mentioning, that you can then push back into your programmatic ad buys. So these things are really all intricately linked.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And that's why I think that these three These three topics really do kind of work well together, because without one, you're missing the other, and so forth.
Yeah, and
so
I guess that,
go ahead.
No.
Yeah, so I think that I'm going to pass it back to you, Alex, and just talk a little bit about the next step section.
Since I've had Wi-Fi issues, maybe Corey, you can start off.
Sure. Yeah, step in here. So, one of the things we want to think about, so we've talked here about strategy. We've talked about the measurement. We've talked about the analytics and the measurement framework that goes into the optimization piece here. And then Eric talked about how we can activate this through one of the channels that lends itself well from here. So I want to think about next steps for a second. First here is to really put yourselves in the shoe of your customer. Again, we talked about how most companies and most agencies are actually not set up in a way that lends itself to thinking about the overall experience that someone would have. And so think about putting yourselves in the shoes of the customer. What are the different ways that they could interact? What are the different touch points that they could have? And what does that customer journey look like? Again, it's probably not going to be linear, but as Alex mentioned, you can start to bucket those into a few phases. Someone who is brand new to yours, someone who's in that research phase, someone who's in the purchase phase, someone who might be in the advocacy phase. And start to think about, from a measurement point of view, what are we expecting to see at all those different phases? Am I expecting to see someone tweeting on behalf of my brand within the first 5 minutes that they learn about the brand? Of course not. But in the advocacy phase, that could be a very valid KPI. And so as we develop that measurement framework, we need to think about each stage, each channel, and what we're going to measure in terms of our content and what we consider success for each channel and at each stage of that life cycle. And then once we've got that figured out, so we know what a baseline looks like, and so that we know when we're going to be overperforming or underperforming at each stage of that journey for each of those channels, that's when we can really start to turn it on. Because you're going to know what's working and what's not. And as you say, pour gasoline on the fire through programmatic, because you can really start to turn it on. Now, if you don't have a measurement framework set up, and if you don't have this strategy defined ahead of time, then turning that on in that programmatic automated way is just going to send you 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. And so it's really critical to think this out before you go. That said, don't be afraid to test. Don't be afraid to try new things. Don't be afraid to be iterative as we go. Okay, I encourage you to ask any questions you may have. I think I see a few coming in here, but feel free to post those in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much to all three of you. We can definitely go ahead and get started on our questions portion. And we do see a couple trickling in, so I'll start with the first one. What is your perspective of how one would apply omnichannel in a B2B services world?
Maybe I can start on that one. I have a couple perspectives. So let's go back to that Starbucks example, but let's move it into B2B. Right? So if you have somebody that goes to your site, so we're not selling anything really, but we are definitely driving leads, and leads is the focus of the B2B space. So if I've got somebody that has come to my site and has downloaded a particular white paper or has filled out a form, I want to make sure that if I go back to them with something, that I am incrementing that message that I deliver to them, and that I deliver that incremented message by email or the next time they come to the website, or through whatever a channel that might be appropriate otherwise. They probably don't have an app, but definitely you want to increment the message each time, because for them, they've already decided, hey, I want to learn about this. So that's at least one aspect of it. It's making sure that message continues to grow or evolve through time based on what their actions are on any part of that channel.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We have another question, I believe for Corey or any one of you. How do you go about defining audiences and segments?
Sure. So once you have a good understanding of the various channels, and you're going to try to determine at that point who are the key audiences who are coming through and interact with these channels. And one of the things we always suggest is that you start with your existing business segments. Some organizations have put a lot of effort into what they consider to be their segments and have consistency across an organization when they speak of those. I mean, I always think about the airlines as an example. Their frequent flyer programs and the different tiers that are there. Someone who's in the very bottom status or someone who doesn't have any status at all might be unfamiliar with your airline. They may need help navigating the site. They may be interested in, they may be doing some fare shopping and don't have loyalty to a particular airline. The way that you're going to interact with someone like that who's trying to attract in is very different than someone who is going to be in your 100,000-mile, million-mile plus club who is very dedicated to your airline, knows all the ins and outs, who is very deeply wedded to your brand and has a lot of potentially even their own kind of identity wrapped up in that. And so the way that you're going to interact with those folks and what you can assume the knowledge they have of your products or services are going to be very different. And so if you've got a lot of effort put into that already, then we suggest you start with those existing business segments and then understand how those relate to the different channels, the different content, and start understanding which segments are interacting with which pieces of content that appeals to them, and how do they do that. One thing I will say, though,
Corey, can I just jump in and say, and one very important reason why you would do that is because they're a very high-value segment, for example, in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the ways that you can start to, if you don't have pre-existing segments, you can start to think about moving beyond those augmented segments, you can think about data-driven segmentation. And so this is where the analytics piece can really help you out. One of the ways you do this is a cluster analysis. There's a couple different algorithms that can do clustering. And what this is going to do, it's going to take all the different data points that you have, and it's going to start to try to identify trends and ways that people group together and things that may not be obvious to you. And it can sometimes identify some really kind of intriguing things, people who all exhibit a certain kind of behavior that maybe never would have occurred to you. And sometimes we're too deep into it and we kind of know too much. And so you can't see things from that very objective point of view that a computer algorithm can. And so this can identify some habits or behaviors, sometimes can point out some trouble spots, folks who run into issues. It's interesting with these algorithms to kind of point them towards things that are problems, so people who are hitting dead ends, and then start to understand, are there certain groups of people who are experiencing frustration or are not able to convert? Sometimes non-converters is actually a really interesting segment to look at as well. So this part is one where I suggest you'll spend a lot of time thinking about the different audiences there, the segments that are there. And as Alex pointed out, we tend to think about, well, who are our most valuable traffic? Okay, well, I'm going to jump right ahead to the people who are spending the most, or maybe in the airline example, it's the people who are the top tier. But the reality is you often are not going to have the most benefit of optimizing that top tier because those folks are already spending essentially everything they have. They are already, if you're in that top tier of travel, every flight that you take is going to be with that airline. There's no more kind of to squeeze out of there. But oftentimes getting folks to move from that second to top tier into the top tier is where you'll find the most optimization. So again, I encourage you to really kind of think these through. And this is where you put that marketing hat on. And this is where the art comes into the science, is in thinking about how do we really optimize based on the data that we have.
So
Thank
true.
you so much. Go ahead if you wanted to add.
No, it's exactly right, Corey. Exactly right.
Wonderful. Well, we did just receive another question from an audience member. For omni-planning, how should we pick which channels to concentrate on first?
Well, I've got a couple thoughts on that, and then Alex will let you say that too. I think there's a couple approaches you can take. You might want to start with channels where you have the most spend. Obviously, if you're going to do some incremental improvement and optimization there, you want to demonstrate some quick wins, and if you're trying to achieve the value of omnichannel, then the channels where you have the most budget allocated are the ones that are going to move the needle the most. Another way you can think about this is where you have the most data available. Some of your channels are going to provide a very rich view of your customers. They're going to support integration with the other channels. They're going to lend themselves to programmatic. A perfect example of this would be to take advantage of remarketing through paid display based on what customers are doing on your website. It's a relatively straightforward way to accomplish that. Oftentimes this is built in. For example, folks who run Google Analytics and then Google AdWords or any of the Google programmatic stack can very easily select a segment within their analytics and then port that segment right into their paid search as an audience, and then be able to target that through programmatic or through paid media. And so that's a relatively straightforward way to enact this. Now that kind of requires you've got that system in place, but it's kind of built-in response loop on there. Also, if you have an established CRM or an email program that utilizes this, you can take advantage of that. And then you're already collecting this data. You can identify those audiences that are going to be not only within the email program, but then you extend those across other channels. And it also lends itself within the email to being able to segment that audience. You can look at what people have purchased or the activities they've got, and then send them emails that are going to be relevant to the activities they're doing. So that's another easy way to go.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. We also have another question about what role does testing play in all of this?
Well, testing plays a... Sorry, go on, Corey.
Yeah, we're going to actually go back to one of these slides here, if I'm still able to pull a particular slide up. And look at this one. You know, as I said before, if you think about your entire universe, and go back to the shoe example, where the person had determined that women's shoes converted the best, and therefore I'm going to send that same shoe to every single person in my list, because overall this is the one that converts the best. And of course, if you do a very simple segmentation and say, okay, but what if we send the shoes that convert best for men to men, and the shoes that convert best for women to women, now you've achieved and gone from what we call this local maximum to the global maximum to the local maximums. And what we're really trying to do here is find, for each of these segments, what are the pieces that are going to behave the best. And so once you've got a measurement framework in place, that's when you can really start to optimize each of these pieces. How am I going to optimize the awareness phase for my repeat customers? How am I going to optimize the awareness phase for brand new folks? And actually for repeat customers, awareness is probably not going to be as big of a thing, but we can think about even on the purchase phase, I've got someone who's a repeat customer. How do I get them to come back more? How do I get them to shift more of their spend with me, as opposed to someone who is higher up in that funnel? How do I get someone who's never purchased before to take that leap? And the way that I speak to those people might be a completely different way. The way that I'm going to market to them, the content that we're going to show to them. And so the way that you optimize that is through testing. The only way I'm going to know what works for each of these different customer lifecycle pieces for each of these different segments is if I am testing each of those pieces to know, wow, my top tier frequent flyers, they really don't care about this fair sale. That is not what moves them. But that double points, that's the thing that moves the needle for them. Someone who's a fair shopper who's just trying to get the lowest price, they don't care about double points. That's not something that's on their radar. So by testing those out, a little bit of hypothesis, a little bit of marketing, we can go, but really testing is the way that really turns this into an optimal scenario.
Great, thank you so much. Another question we received, what skills are required? Oh, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one little thing here. And that's this, is that, I think it was Sun Tzu that once said that the strategy without tactics is the slowest path to victory. And it's the same thing here. You need to have a strategy for your testing, right? Like if you just start to go and do this testing based on hunches, you're going to find that there's n number of things and places that you can go. So if we go again back to our measurement framework, and we're starting to see differences emerge amongst different audiences at different stages in that customer journey, you can ladder on top of that, or overlay on top of that rather, a testing plan. And the testing plan says, okay, we're going to do this in a structured fashion, by audience, by stage, for these particular channels using this. And then you take a look at what you have before you just go back into endless cycles of testing. Because as Corey said, you skipped over it fairly quickly, but you don't want to optimize for a minimum, right? You want to find those places that are going to deliver for you the best bang for your buck. And so the plan around testing that's understood by all and executed appropriately is important. Otherwise, you just find yourself doing all kinds of tests and you can't actually learn from them.
All right, are we ready for one more question? Hello?
Sure.
Okay, great. So what skills are required to activate this, and what do you recommend, insourced versus outsourced?
Well, I can take a stab at that. So if I go back to any of this, analysis is the number one skill. People that are able to understand what the data is that they're looking at, and then have a natural curiosity against that. So the analysis skills are first and foremost. Of course, you're going to have some familiarity with the tools at play, but the analysis skills are first and foremost. With respect to insourcing, anything that requires a really fundamental knowledge of the business to understand these nuances. Let's take, for example, there are certain channels out there which are really very, very business specific that probably a consulting firm or an agency may not be aware of, or if they are, they really haven't played around with that very much. So anything that is very specific to the business, that's kind of where you want to own that skill. That's something you really should keep in-house. But sometimes when you're getting in the middle of a campaign or you're launching a campaign and you know that there's going to be a big load of work, that's obviously a time that you may want to consider some staff augmentation and getting some outsourced skill sets around. But regardless, I would recommend that if you are going to choose to do some outsourcing, you really want somebody that's going to be able to transfer the skills in-house, because certain things need to be owned by the organization. So, and it's understandable because these skills are in fairly short supply that the organization might not have them in-house, which is why you're going for them outside. You want to make sure that part of that is what's appropriate for us to learn, what are the types of areas that we need to build capacity and capabilities within.
Wonderful. I believe we have time for just one more question. So it is there a workbook detailing the main steps to implement programmatic customer acquisition available? What infrastructure do we need? Which main data? Critical tracking strategies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can try and handle that one. This is a pretty common request from our clients. I think that at the end of the day, they want to know how to get started. So I think that depending on the complexity of your objectives in the marketing group and the size of your budget, there's a few things you can do, but there's really no workbook necessarily detailing the steps or how to get from A to Z. Especially in terms of sometimes questions like what vendor do I need to go with? What are the difference between the 10 vendors that have contacted me this week? What's the difference between their platforms? Which one's right for me? I think that in a lot of cases, the first thing you really need to do is find your access point. Your access point is essentially going to be a way to get into the programmatic sphere. And oftentimes, a lot of cases for most businesses, that means reaching out to either a platform specifically, like a Criteo, a Tapad, a DBM, the list goes on, or it means reaching out to a partner, a trading desk of some sorts that that can make some of those buys for you. From there, I think that you really need to focus back on the KPI framework, because that's where you're going to get your critical tracking strategies and the main data that you're going to be using to buy media against. So again, don't be just kind of overwhelmed with the detail of some of the customer or the KPI frameworks. Start simple. If you think that it's a bit daunting a task to create some of those frameworks, start simple. Find out 2 or 3 primary audiences that you can target that you consider to be really, really valuable. Reach out to a partner and find a way to start targeting them immediately. At the end of the day, it really does take just perseverance to find out where are the benefits moving from one vendor to the next, and how can you get them working for you.
Yeah, and I also would add to that, Eric, that if you're looking for first next steps, there's a lot of vendors, particularly when it comes to programmatic, and agencies that can provide you that can educate you on this. And so I would start to make some calls and some asks about how we would start, and you'll find that they're probably more than willing to pass on some of that knowledge.
So unfortunately, we have run out of time for today. But Alex, Corey, and Eric, thank you so much for all of the great information. AMA members can view an archive of this webcast at any time by visiting ama.org/webcast. Please also take a moment to complete the post-webcast survey. Let us know what you thought of today's webcast and what topics you want to see presented on future webcasts. I want to thank Cardinal Path, our generous sponsor, and ReadyTalk, who provided us with a web conferencing platform for today's webcast. If you'd like to learn more about ReadyTalk and their services, please feel free to visit readytalk.com/AMA. And last but not least, I'd really like to thank the audience for your participation and want to remind you to join the AMA for our weekly Thought Leader webcast. Again, we will be sending you follow-up information with this recording and these slides. It will be available also on our website. This ends our presentation for today. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.